Namaskar. Importance and challenges of ethics. Objectives. While spelling out the importance of ethics is ethics insofar as it affects human conduct and behavior in the society, this unit seeks to respond to the some of the important challenges to ethics as a philosophical discipline, particularly from certain approaches to make ethics itself relative. Thus, we attempt to look at some of the figures in the tradition of Western philosophy like Fletcher and Ginsberg, figures representing these challenging currents of thought, and we offer an in-depth evolution of their positions. Introduction. Ethics in the philosophical treatise which studies human behavior and tries to determine what is right or wrong behavior. It is also called moral philosophy from the Greek ethos and the Latin mores, which mean customs, way of behavior, human character. That there is in man a spontaneous awareness of the distinction between right and wrong behavior is an in, indubitable fact. What philosophy here, like elsewhere, cannot content itself with simply registering facts. It it tries to reflect on the meaningfulness of such facts, establish them of reject establish them or reject them on the rational basis. Understand these implications, draw their their practical consequences, and above all, multi their above all intuit their ultimate cause, if any. Our study of ethics is also conditioned by some philosophical assumptions which we take to be philosophically established in other treatises. Perhaps the three principal one are the possibility of meta-empirical knowledge, the ontological structure of reality, and man as a rational and free being, philosophically established in critical ontology and psychology respectively. For us, therefore, ethics is an attempt not only to understand what is and what is not right human behavior, the empirical and meta-empirical ground, if any, of the distinction between right and wrong behavior, but also to see whether the conclusions thus drawn can serve as objective norms for practical conduct. The importance of ethics is obvious from as far as back in history as well as we can tell. Man has always sought to know how to lead a good life and to draw up rules of conduct. Thinkers of all thinkers of all cultures thinkers of all cultures tries to explain uh, in what this good life consisted, and especially why precisely it was good. It is not so much that traditional moral values are questioned as the just bore in inviolability of life in cases of the hopelessly suffering and of unwanted pregnancies, sexual intercourse courses only between the legally married in dissolubility of marriage, but etc. But more radically, still that the beginning meaningfulness of an unchanging and universally valid morality is brought into question. The causes of this modern questioning are hard to pin down. Certainly, the spread of education, advance in science and technology, problems arising from modern way of living like the ever increasing urbanization, easier communication media, faster means of travel, whereby people of one culture come in closer contact with people of another culture, etc. Some of the causes. But if, as we have already implied, moral thinking is intimately linked with philosophical thinking in general, it might very well be that these causes, whatever they might be, are to be sought for on a deeper human level. Human person perhaps is not so much asking about the morality of this and that human act, but more deeply still about himself, the meaning of his life, the direction of human history, the significance of the human world he lived in, the ambit of his knowledge, and the possibility of his ever getting an answer to the question he asked. Ethics, of course, cannot dream of suggesting answers to such radical questions, but it might well it might well prove to be a way of approach to questions which lie beyond its own field of inquiry. The challenge of situation ethics is a kind of approach the morality we might expect from an ex- existentialist who tend to reject the very idea of human nature or any nature or essence for that matter. Joseph Fletcher, the former dean of St. Paul's Cathedral, Cin- Cincinnati, Cincinnati, and professor of social ethics, Episcopal Theology of School, Cambridge, Massachusetts, USA, published his classical situation ethics in 1961. At the onset, he presents his view as the golden mean between the two uh, rep- reprehensible extremes of legalism and antinomianism. Unlike the latter, he arouses us. The situationist enters into every decision-making situation armed with the ethical maxims of his community and his heritage. There is no question of throwing out all laws, rules, and commandments. Commandments. However, he treats them with respect and illuminates of his problems, but is prepared to compromise but is prepared to compromise them or set them aside in the situation if love seems better served by doing so. Now that last phase serves to characterize what makes Fletcher describe as a Christian in whole approach to morality. Fletcher even takes a swipe at Kant's legalism, which produces universal laws like a lie is always wrong. He asks, but what if you have to tell a lie to keep a promise secret? And answers, maybe you lie, and if so, good for you. If you follow love's lead. When we adopt a critical approach, we cannot but record our dissatisfaction as regards the carelessness with which Fletcher defines his position. If Aristotle and anyone who holds some sort of natural law morality are to be counted among the situationists, that grouping has been emptied of almost all precise meaning. All precise meaning. The only ones excluded from that nomenclature would be the extreme legalist and antinomian, and would they be so numerous and so influential to warrant the setting up of whole new morality, just about any system of deontological ethics that is open to prudence and casuistry is already sufficient to respond to the difficulty, and when Fletcher pens something to the effect that situation ethics goes part of the way with natural law, accepting reason as the instrument of judgment while rejecting the notion that the good is given in the natural nature of things objectively, one cannot help wondering whether he had really understood natural law and objective morality properly at all. Fletcher has, to say the least, a rather legal legalistic definition of love. so long as an act is done selflessly without the agent seeking any clearly manifest material gain. It is a normal it is a moral act. Even the sickest of mentality drains act could also be robbed in an ethically laudable if they were done without any demonstratively material profit being sought in the process. But if love is selflessness, before we can access its rightness or wrongness, shouldn't we first inquire into the nature of the self? Beside, as one might well ask, why should love be the norm of morality and not hate? Ultimately, one can only answer the question by saying that love enhances one's personhood, one's human nature adequately considered. It makes one more fully human, fully alive, and hate does not do that. This obliges us to recognize a more basic and deeper norm: love in itself. To give Fletcher his dues, one has to admit that he does give the impression that he has done some critical reflection on love and its authentic meaning, even if it wouldn't stand up to anything like a deeper metaphysical query. He trots out some fancy terminology from Tillich to this end, using terms made popular by Tillich and other. We may say that situationalism is a method that proceeds so to speak from its one and only law, agape, love to second, the Sophia wisdom, containing many general rules of more or less reliability, to three, the kairos moment of decision, the fullness of time in which the responsible self is the self in the situation decides whether the Sophia can serve them or not. Whence he goes on to make a highly simplistic summary of how the rival ethicist proceeds. Legalists make an ideal of Sophia, and antinomians repudiate it, and situationalists use it. Finally, Fletcher, taking his cue from Socrates to the effect that the unexamined life is not worth living, suggested that unexamined ethical maxims are not worth living by, and then he unlaces a salvo onto maximum that the end does not justify the means. On the contrary, he asks, if the end does not justify the means, what does? And he answers, obviously nothing. Whence Whence is another proposition of situation ethics: only the end justifies the means, nothing else. In the light of the proceeding, this boils down to say that anything anything done out of love the means is thereby justified or made morally good. He is careful to quickly add, not any old end will justify any old mean. Only love would do the job, and then he tops it off with another chilling remark. Being pragmatic, the situationist always asks the price and supposes that in theory and practice everything has its price. Everything. Please note, even for a pearl of great price, whatever it is might be sold for love's sake if the situation calls for it. This kind of remark is chilling because it can be used to justify the suicide bomber who blows himself up with the host of innocent civilians. And as we have seen, Fletcher actually does that. Even if we don't fully endorse Fletcher and his brand of situation ethics, is there something we can learn from what he has tried to tell us? He is reminding us of a timeless and oft oft forgotten maxims: unless an action, however good in itself, is done with the motive of sincere love, it has no real ethical value whatsoever. Cultural and ethical subjectivism. There is a quite understandable objection that any kind of ethical system based based on human nature, however adequately considered, has to face and that stems from the undeniable facts of cultural relativism. In other culture, polygamy is viewed as right and moral. In another, it is roundly condemned. Not too long ago, certain tribes in the South Sea Iceland considered the painless killing of of one's parents of final duty. Most of us would be horrified the very idea. Sometimes within the same country or culture, there are splits. Some Indians disapprove of the remarriage of widows. Others have no problem with it. People across the globe are radically divided on the morality of birth control and divorce. Now, if there were some kind of common human nature upon which our moral laws are based, how do we explain these wide divergences, even contradictions? Furthermore, studies in anthropology and sociology have led us to accept cultural relativism. There is no one culture which can be seen as superior to others. We are told each culture makes sense is sufficient unto itself within its own religious and philosophical presuppositions. It would be grossly unfair to one culture to arrogate to itself the right to stand on judgment on another one. And even if one were to claim that she is not critiquing an alien culture from his her cultural standpoint, but from the fancied neutral ground of common human nature, is not that to say the least rather naive, for he she would be in effect advocating an understanding of human nature mediated by the pre-understanding of his her own culture. However subjectively conceived he may be that strict detachment is being observed, and in any case, in the practical order of things, it would end up by the economically and politically dominant culture foisting itself upon all weaker ones, obliterating all native or local cultural cultures and little traditions in one vast process of cultural domination. In fact, it is not this what globalization amounts to, and haven't we all been most vocal in finding fault with it? Let us begin our response to these very pertinent questions with one important introductory remark. Many of people who are up in arms at any mention of a common natural law confuse it with the rigid for formalism of the Kantian categorical imperative. Nothing could be more wrong. The categorical imperative of Kantian morality could not but enjoin a strict and absolute submission without any possibility of the least exception. To make matter worse, they had to be motivated by their purely internal drive, not out of love for anyone or anything external to agent, not even love of one's country, God, family, or friends. It had to be nothing but duty and duty for duty's sake. All this is enough to make any self-respecting and antinomian see red and see and say the least. Kant was determined that his system of ethics have an autonomous source, basing moral basing mortal conduct on external ground, the will of God, osim or of positive law. The Durkheim would be to ask for trouble. An atheist would be deprived of any moral foundation, and positive law would uh, see, secrecy law would scarcely help matters. It is susceptible to so many variants, often on the basis of vested interest and corruption, that it would affect at best a very shaky moral setup. On the other hand, Kant's agnostic epistemology, influenced by Hume, rendered it quite impossible to take the natural law based on human nature as a norm of morality. As the first critic has argued, we cannot know the thing in itself, the phenomenon, and the human nature is one of those things. Precisely, the only solution was for him to ground it among those a prior practical principle built into our very mental makeup, parallel to those speculative principles that the critic of pure reason has uncovered. These a priori synthetic judgments were endowed with the qualities of strict universality and absolute necessity. One could as much expectation exceptions. One could as much and expect exceptions to moral laws as one could require, say the principle of identity or contradiction to allow for contravention on the basis of special circumstances. But if one were not to go along with human Kant and accept that not only is there a common human nature in which we all participate, what can discern what basically constitute it, the problem is dispersed at once. In the first place, this doesn't open the door to all manners of cultural exploitation and foisting questionable pre-understandings and perceptions onto recul- recalcitrant people and their cultures. The basic makeup of all humans and common human nature would comprise the following data. We are embodied beings with a capacity to transcend space and time, are social by nature, rooted in the world, and have some sort of relatedness to the ultimate. Only that and nothing more. The no host of uncritical uh, commonness are being smuggled in as a kind of package deal, forcing people to accept certain attitude or to people, places, things, and even God as constituting our common human nature. Furthermore, sense perception is a necessary constituent of human nature, and this in itself opens the door to certain relativism, perceptual relativism. Now, this opens the door to a whole range of divergence within and between cultures. First, if all people are seeing, hearing, smelling, and testing the same objects, they are not necessarily apprehending them in the same way. There is the possibility of acquitted tests, and some people acquire them while others don't. Accepting a common human nature does not oblige us to subscribe to a single common view of things, as rigid and unchanging as the Kantian categorical imperatives. In in as much as much of culture is built on the sense perception, there is plenty of scope for a certain cultural relativism. However, not all cultural differences can be reduced to the mere relativeness of our perception of things. Sometimes it stems from a broader and wider interpretation of whole complexes of interrelated experiences. A particular local, regional, or even national customs or right may imply a judgment that people of a particular gender, ethnic, or religious background are either non persons or rather inferior versions of the species. As a result, they are disqualified from enjoying certain privileges and rights that another dominant group claims. exclusively for it. In cases such as these, where a clear ethical bias is manifest, one has every right to challenge and critique the culture concerned. Culture divergence, divergences based on a questionable hermeneutics and implying errant discrimination against certain people cannot justify itself on the ground of cultural difference. Morris Ginsburg on the diversity of morals. Professor of sociology at the University of London from uh, 1929 to 1954, just 1 year before his retirement, Ginsburg delivered the Huxley memorial lecture on the phenomena of apparent ethical relativism that anthropologists and sociologists were unearthing in cross-cultural studies. It would be pertinent to quote in anticipation the conclusion he arrives at after a long and patient scrutiny of the facts. Amidst variations, moral codes everywhere ex- exhibits striking similarities in essentials. There are no societies without rules of conduct backed by the general approval of the members. There are none which do not regard that which contribute to the needs and survival of the group as good. None which do not condemn conduct interfering with the satisfaction of common needs and threatening the stability of social relations. At Ginsburg sums it up insightfully. It might be argued that the diversity of moral judgments affords no more proof of the subjectivity than the diversity of judgments regarding matter of fact throws any doubt on the possibility of valid scientific judgments about them. He and then he then goes on to detail six different contexts wherein a certain variations in moral practices may be noted between and within certain notions and cultures. In some they are as follows. Number one, variations in the view as to whom moral rules were held to be applicable. Number two, variations are arising due to differences of opinion as to the non-moral quantities of certain acts and their consequences. Number three, variations arising from the fact that the same act appears to be seen differently in different situations and context. Number four, variations arising due to the differences of emphasis on different element comprising moral life. Number five, variations arising from the possibility of alternative ways of satisfying primary need. Number six, variations due to differences of moral insight and general level of development, ethical as well as intellectual. The range of person to whom moral rules are held to be applicable. Uh, Anthropologists like Taylor recognize a certain natural solidity comprising a measure of mutual for forbearance, forbearance, helpfulness, and trust as constitutive of all societies. Everyone felt somehow bound to his or her neighbor by certain societal bond of shared care and responsibility. However, there was a divergence of view as to who really were one's neighbors initially, and quite understandably, neighbor was rather narrowly understood to be only those of one's own family, tribe or clan, and very often it was only the males who, in the full sense, were considered moral persons to whom societal norms in all fullness had to be applied. However, what constitute one's neighborness is not a particular set of racial features or one's sex, but human nature adequately considered, and so moral laws have to be applied to all persons, irrespective of their age, sex, social status, or nationality. No law was understood as discriminating against one's neighbor. There was only a mistaken perception as to what the term meant. It could well be the vested interest made use of this confusions to justify their breaking of promises and agreements to colonize natives. After all, if the natives had no souls, then they were mere subhumans, and the ethical prescriptions didn't apply in their case. Differences arising from the growth of knowledge concerning certain acts. This is perhaps best exemplified with the medical discovery in fairly recent times of the role played by microbes in generating disease. This has given us new responsibilities as regard cleanliness and hygiene. Hospital staff may be guilty of criminal neglect if they are careless in these areas nowadays, something totally unheard of in ancient period. Again, it was only in the 18th century that people desisted from from torturing and burning to death alleys, which is at that time such people were seen as being guilty of heinous crime, and due to their pernicious influence or occult power could cause serious bodily harm to peoples, bring about natural disaster, and jeopardize not only their own salvation but of others as well. As Leakey remarked, granted these propositions, there was no moral difficulty in drawing the conclusion that they should be put to death. Happily, we live in more enlightened times, and developments in psychology and sociology have helped us recognize the folly and error underlying such views. The same act is seen differently in different contexts, cultures. Divergences here are very often the result of ethical laws and principles being couched in a very brief formula. As a result, the passage of time or the wholly new set of circumstances in a different climate or culture yield examples of differences in ethical behavior as regard the same act. When on closer study, we realize that these are totally different ones altogether. What constitute a story in one place might may not be so in another, depending on the standard of living. A simplistic condemnation of aggression may only apparently be broken in the case of a preemptive strike where one nation attacks another because it has reasonable ground to believe that the other is planning a full-scale invasion. In a society where there is no established system of properly conducted law courts, self-redress may be a legitimate option, whereas it would be a condemnable wherever there is a working network of judiciary procedures. Variations due to differences of emphasis in moral responsibility, even if there is a universal agreement that we should do what is right and spurn all that is evil. There may be differences of view as to what is the ultimate reason we should do so. It may mean, as Ginsburg summarizes it, because it is the will of God, and that will may be considered inscrutable, or it may mean because of the love of God or because of the love of men, not so much because they are worthy of it, but because they are the objects of divine love and enabled by the incarnation, or again for prudential reasons, because it would lead to uh, beati- beatitude in this or another world. Sometimes a particular stress may lead to a certain imbalance if there is no critical reflection the trend accompanying the trend. Irrational feeling of love and devotion may land one in the extremes of fanaticism, and overstress on faith may lead to a neglect of justice. Self-discipline may wind up in repulsive forms of masochism. It is not so much ethical relativism that it is to be blamed for all these oddities, but a lack of the cultivation of the spirit of self-criticism and uh, rector issue. Rector issue. Variations due to different ways of fulfilling basic needs. This arises when people thought they may be in agreement as to what constitute the most basic need of humans. First order values, different societies and cultures seek to fulfill them by alternative ways. Second order values, for instance, most communities favor the monogamous marriage and the sex rules associated with it, the association of sex with enduring companionship, the fussing of sex with the tenderness, the enhancement of the parental relationship through shared interest in the upbringing and love of children, providing scrutiny, providing security to children by the experience of parents' love for them and for each other, and so on. These are all first order values, and all cultures recognize these. However, they may seek different ways to realize these ways other than monogamous marriage and its customary practices. Thus, in Bantu society in Africa, physical attraction, affection, and companionship usually follow quite different channels. Instead of seeking these within the context of monogamy, quite different channels are followed for each of the above mentioned second order values. A man derising his wife, loving his sister, and seeking companionship among his male relatives and friends. This is where there is ample scope of dialogue and exchange, but where people of different cultures can challenge each other's presum- presuppositions and customs, seeking how to more fully and deeply realize the basic goals, first order values that they all respect in our more enlightened times of freedom of inquiry and dialogue, when we have come to realize that no culture is perfect and infallible, and that we have a lot to learn even from those we don't quite agree with. Such exchanges can prove beneficial to all the parties concerned, and no one will come away from serious and sincere sharing with quite the same convictions and presuppositions with which he or she entered into it. Divergences due to the particular level of mental development, the development of mental and therefore moral acumen may be gauged. Ginsburg says from five perspectives. Number one, the degree of universalism that a moral system envisages. This is a matter of assessing whether the moral code stops with the confines of the family, tribe, or clan, or whether it goes on to include rules governing how one should deal with the larger family, embracing people of all nations, ethnic groups, cultures, and religions, and making no discrimination according to sex, age, or religion. Number B, the range or comprehensiveness of experience embodied in the particular moral code. Obviously, the moral code of a small group that takes out the kind of nomadic existence by hunting and gathering will be very sensitive to issues linked with rather limited way of life, but it will be lacking as to guidelines for business, economic, and interreligious relationship. Number C, the extent to which the underlying moral codes and principles there that are the basis of any moral system are brought to light and scrutinized as to how justified they are, and whether they have been made to fit together coherently and harmoniously. Number D, the extent to which there is a separation of moral codes from law and from religion. This is important because if no clear demarcation is made, the principle of the dominant religion will be taken as the basis of law and morality, and this will imply scant respect, if any, for people who don't subscribe to the doctrine of the dominant religion. Obviously, there would be left scope for individual decision in certain matters, and the law should not employ its machinery to oblige everyone to act as he if he or she was in full accord with the teachings of a given religion. Number E, the extent to which moral systems permit, even encourage self-criticism and self-direction. A system which assumes that even adults are too immature to make their own religious and moral decisions and refuse to tolerate even the the mildest form of dissent, even when presented non-violently, is certainly inferior to one that assumes for a public debate on complex issues and in the light of contemporary development in the social sciences. Let us sum up. We have exposed the main challenges of ethics arising from situation ethics, subjectivism, and divergence of morals. In our conclusion, we would like to emphasize that we should not commit the mistake to the effect that the more technologically developed and industry defined a culture is, the more enlightened it will be. In the sense of the five norms outlined above by Ginsburg, nor should we assume that access to the media and information technology would necessarily create a society made of people who are more critical and less likely to be led astray by unscrupulous demag- demag- demagogue demagogues and clever dicks who are hell bent on making a fast buck for themselves at whatever cost to other people, the environment, and the future generations. Globalization today is proceeding along very unethical lines and has been elaborated by the culture that prides itself on being a model for all the world, on whose very pertinence pertinences or to democracy and family values clouds will be questioned. It is by what Penniker calls a diatopical exchange, a dialogue between cultures. The societies can learn from one another, challenge each other, and grow together without being obliged to model themselves on the allegedly higher level of intellectual development. Some cultures may have a lot to offer others from one angle, while they need to learn from others as regard another aspect. Paulo Fre- Freire, for instance, opened that third world cultures should learn from the technological development of the West, but in turn have a lot to offer a later from the way they have learned to preserve family values and a less destructive way of relating to nature. In all this, it is human nature adequately considered that is to be repeatedly brought into the area of discussion, sharing, and debate whenever we feel decisions and judgments have to be made. Thank you.